The snow had been falling since dawn. Heavy, wet flakes that clung to roofs and telephone wires, turning the world into a blur of white and gray. By evening, the streets of the old industrial district were deserted, wrapped in a silence that only winter can bring. Lena trudged along the side of the road, her boots soaked through, her fingers stiff beneath the torn gloves. Every breath left a trembling ghost in the air. Her stomach ached with hunger, and her head felt like it had been hollowed out by the cold. There was nowhere left to go. She had already been turned away from 2 shelters, and the city lights behind her seemed to fade with every step. When she reached the intersection, the snow had begun to melt into ice. She hugged herself tighter and looked both ways. The road looked empty. Only the distant hum of an engine broke the stillness. She tried to hurry across, but her foot slipped. Then came the light. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness like twin blades. The screech of tires split the night. And for one unbearable second, everything froze. Her breath, her heart, even the air itself. The impact threw her sideways, weightless. Then the ground came up hard and fast. The world went silent again, except for the whisper of snow landing softly on her coat. For a moment Lena thought she was dead. The cold seeped through her clothes, sharp as needles. A shape moved above her, someone kneeling, a man's voice breaking through the ringing in her ears. Hey, can you hear me? Don't move. Please don't move. She blinked. The world was spinning. A silhouette leaned over her, backlit by blinding headlights. His breath came out in clouds, quick and anxious. I'm calling for help, he said, fumbling for his phone. No, she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. Please, no hospital. He hesitated. His face was hidden by the glare, but she could sense his conflict. Fear, guilt, and something gentler. I just need somewhere warm, she murmured. Please. He stayed silent for a few seconds that stretched like minutes. Then he exhaled. All right, he said quietly. Let's get you out of the cold. Strong hands slid beneath her shoulders. Pain flared in her thigh, and she gasped, but before she could protest, he lifted her with surprising ease. Her cheek pressed against the rough fabric of his coat. It smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. As he carried her toward the car, the night swallowed them. 2 strangers crossing a frozen world, one broken, one trying to make amends for what he had just done. The engine started. Headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the storm. And as they drove away, the snow began to fall harder, closing behind them like a curtain. The car glided through the storm in uneasy silence. The rhythmic hiss of the wipers and the soft thud of snow against the windshield were the only sounds inside. Lena sat half reclined in the passenger seat, wrapped in a thick blanket the man had pulled from the back. Every bump in the road sent a dull ache through her hip, but she bit it back, afraid that if she complained, he might change his mind and take her to the hospital after all. The man's profile was calm but tense, square jaw, sharp nose, eyes fixed on the road ahead. His hands gripped the wheel too tightly. Occasionally, he glanced at her, but when she turned her head, he looked away, as if caught doing something forbidden. Are you in pain? He asked at last, his voice low, careful. I'll live, Lena muttered. He nodded, not pressing further. Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the city lights behind them. They drove for what felt like forever until the houses grew larger, and the road wound upward into the hills. Finally, he slowed down before a tall gate made of wrought iron. With a press of a button, the gates creaked open, revealing a long tree-lined drive half buried in snow. Lena stared out the window, dazed. The car's headlights slid over the outline of a large estate. Tall windows, stone walls, and a guest house tucked to one side. Everything about the place whispered of wealth and solitude. He parked in front of the smaller building and turned off the engine. We're here, he said. You can rest inside. It's warm. Lena hesitated, gripping the blanket tighter. Why are you helping me? He paused before answering. Because I hit you, he said plainly. And because you look like you haven't been warm in a very long time. He stepped out and came around to her side, opening the door. The wind rushed in, sharp and biting. When she tried to stand, her leg gave way, and without a word, he lifted her again, this time more gently, as if he'd learned the shape of her pain. Inside, the guest house smelled faintly of pine wood and old books. The light was golden and soft, pooling across a simple but elegant room. a small couch, a fireplace, and a bed covered in a gray wool blanket. He set her down carefully, then disappeared for a moment and returned with a first aid kit. I used to work with rescue crews when I was younger, he explained, cleaning the scrape on her thigh. Just bruised. No break. Lucky me, Lena whispered, watching his hands, steady, deliberate, almost detached, like a man who'd done this sort of thing 100 times before but hadn't expected to again. When he was done, he handed her a glass of water. My name's Daniel, he said. She looked at him, uncertain. Lena. He nodded once. Get some rest, Lena. There's food in the kitchen. Eat something if you can. I'll check on you in the morning. Before she could respond, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Lena sat motionless for a while, listening to the silence. The wind howled faintly outside, brushing against the windows like a ghost. Her body trembled, not from cold this time, but from the sheer strangeness of feeling safe. She looked around the room, the clean sheets, the flicker of the fire, the soft hum of warmth in the walls. Her eyes stung. She hadn't slept in a bed for weeks. Slowly she lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. As the snowstorm whispered outside, her body finally unclenched, and for the first time in months, Lena drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, while somewhere beyond the frosted glass, Daniel stood in the dark, watching the snow erase his tire tracks from the road. Morning arrived quietly, wrapped in the soft hush of falling snow. A pale silver light filtered through the curtains, and for a long time Lena didn't move. She lay still beneath the heavy blanket, half afraid to open her eyes, half certain that when she did, the warmth around her would vanish, that she would wake again under a bridge or in some abandoned hallway, alone with the cold. But when she stirred, the air was still warm. The faint scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Somewhere beyond the door, she heard the low hum of a heater and the creak of footsteps on wooden floors. Her leg ached, but not as much as she feared. Carefully she sat up, glancing around. The guest house was small but immaculate. A single room divided by glass panels into a cozy living space and kitchenette. A simple landscape painting hung above the bed, and a thick rug muffled her steps. Everything looked untouched, like no one had lived here for months. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and limped toward the window. Outside she saw the main house across the courtyard, tall, elegant, and distant. Its windows reflected the snowy morning, but none of them were lit. The mansion looked asleep or perhaps abandoned. A quiet knock startled her. Come in, she called, her voice rough from sleep. The door opened and Daniel stepped inside, dressed in a black coat and gloves, a thermos in one hand and a paper bag in the other. His eyes softened when he saw her awake. Good morning, he said. You slept through the storm. I didn't mean to, she murmured. That's the point of resting. He set the bag on the table. Coffee, sandwiches, and some soup. You should eat. The smell of warmth and food hit her all at once, and her stomach twisted painfully. She reached for the thermos, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you. Daniel gave a small nod and moved toward the fireplace, adjusting the logs until the flames caught again. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just cautious, as if both were still deciding whether the other was real. After a while he said quietly, You don't have to explain anything right now. I don't need to know what happened to you. But I'd like to make sure you're safe. Lena looked down, her voice barely audible. Safe is a new word for me. He glanced over his shoulder. Then maybe it's time you learn what it feels like. When he left again, she sat at the table, staring at the steam curling up from her cup. Every swallow of soup seemed to anchor her a little more to the present moment. For the first time in years she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. Outside, the wind eased and sunlight began to sparkle on the snowdrifts. Lena leaned back, closing her eyes. Somewhere deep inside her, a small, fragile warmth began to stir, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. That evening, when Daniel returned from wherever he had gone, he found her sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, reading an old book she had found on the shelf. She looked up as he entered, and for the briefest second, he saw not the frightened woman he'd rescued, but someone quietly gathering herself back together. Do you need anything? He asked. She shook her head. No. This is enough. Daniel lingered a moment longer before retreating to the door. Then rest well, Lena. The world can wait another day. When the door closed, Lena turned back to the fire. The crackle of the logs sounded almost like breathing, slow, steady, alive. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. Days passed like slow-moving clouds, quiet, identical, yet gently changing. The snow outside began to soften, pulling back from the edges of the stone steps and tree trunks. Inside the guest house, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke, coffee, and something warm Lena hadn't known for years: calm. She spent her mornings by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the frost melt from the branches. Sometimes Daniel crossed the courtyard toward the main house, carrying tools or blueprints under his arm. He always moved with a kind of contained precision, as if his thoughts lived far ahead of his body. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. That, more than anything, made her want to speak. It started one evening over dinner, simple soup and bread at the small kitchen table. The silence between them felt gentle, not empty. The wind whispered against the glass, and Lena found herself tracing the rim of her cup with one finger before she finally said, "You live alone?" Daniel looked up from his plate. "Ido." "By choice." He gave a faint smile. "At first. Then by habit." She nodded slowly, waiting for him to ask her the same, but he didn't. He only poured her another cup of tea and leaned back, giving her space to continue. "My mother used to say that silence is what kills people," Lena said quietly. "Not hunger. Not cold. Just silence. It eats at you from the inside." Daniel's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "Your mother, is she still?" "She died when I was 16. Lena's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Alcohol. Frostbite. It doesn't matter which one came first." He didn't say he was sorry. Instead, he set his cup down and said, "You survived it." A bitter smile flickered at the edge of her lips. "I don't think survival is the right word. I just kept walking." They fell into a thoughtful silence. The fire crackled softly. After a while, Daniel spoke again. "You mentioned once that you liked to read." Her head lifted slightly, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember what people cling to," he said simply. "It tells you what still keeps them alive." She hesitated, then admitted, "Books were my escape. I'd steal old paperbacks from the town library. Not to sell, just to have them near me. The smell of them, the sound of the pages, it felt like someone else's world was big enough to hide in." He stood, disappeared for a moment, and returned with a small stack of worn novels from a shelf near the door. He placed them in front of her. Austen Orwell, a thin collection of poems by someone she'd never heard of. "Consider this an extended loan," he said. Lena looked at the books as if they were fragile living things. She reached for the one on top, her fingers brushing the faded cover. "You're not very good at keeping people out," she said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe I stopped trying." That night, after he left, Lena sat by the fire reading until her eyes burned. Each line she traced felt like a thread leading her back towards something she'd lost. Her voice, her curiosity, her sense of being more than what the world had done to her. And in the quiet, while snow began to fall again outside, Daniel sat in his own house, the light from the guest house flickering through the window. He listened to the faint rhythm of pages turning and thought, for the first time in years, that maybe solitude wasn't meant to last forever. Winter loosened its hold on the valley, but in the hills where Daniel's estate stood, the cold lingered stubbornly, soft drifts of snow glowing faintly in the last pale sunlight of February. By then Lena could walk without limping. She moved around the guest house like someone relearning how to exist in stillness. Every morning, she opened the window to let in air that smelled of pine and thawing earth. And every evening Daniel brought something: a book, a blanket, a quiet word that made her feel less like a guest and more like someone who might stay. They had fallen into a rhythm neither of them planned. He worked in his study in the main house, sketching architectural plans under a wide skylight. She cooked in the small kitchen, her hands remembering what it meant to care for something, even if it was just soup. At noon, they often met outside by the stone wall where the first moss was beginning to show. The conversations began clumsy, uncertain, about books, about weather, about things that didn't matter. But soon something softened. "Why architecture?" Lena asked one afternoon, sitting on the wall with a mug of tea cupped between her palms. Daniel shrugged lightly. It's the only way I know to give shape to silence. She tilted her head. That sounds poetic for a man who designs houses. He smiled faintly. Buildings are just shelters. The real work is in what they keep safe. Lena studied him for a moment. You sound like someone who's built too many walls, inside and out. He laughed under his breath. You're not wrong. Sometimes he would read aloud from the books she picked, his voice steady and low, filling the room like warmth from the fire. She found herself watching his hands as he turned the pages, his eyes when he paused over a line. He had a way of listening deeply attentively that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't thought possible. And slowly, without meaning to, her defenses began to crumble. One evening, as a light snow began to fall again, she found herself standing at the window long after he had gone. The fire had burned low. The room smelled of pine wood and candle wax. Her chest ached, not from fear, not from cold, but from the strange, delicate ache of wanting to trust someone. She didn't hear him return. The door creaked open softly, and Daniel's voice came from behind her. I forgot to leave this, he said, holding out a small folded page, a poem copied in his neat handwriting. Lena took it carefully. Did you write this? He hesitated. No. My wife did. Before she passed. The air between them shifted. Not heavier, just more real. I'm sorry, Lena whispered. Daniel nodded once. It was years ago. But I think she'd like that someone else will read her words again. Lena unfolded the page. The handwriting was beautiful, gentle arcs and even lines. She read a few words aloud. There are people who find each other the way winter finds the fire. Slowly, desperately, and just in time. Her voice trembled slightly on the last line. When she looked up, Daniel was already at the door. Good night, Lena. Good night, she said, holding the paper as if it might disappear. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling something growing quietly inside her. Not love, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of belonging. And outside, the snow fell in soft spirals, covering the world in silence once more. The days grew longer. By early March, the snow had retreated into the shaded corners of the garden, and the air carried the faint scent of thawed soil and wet bark. The world was waking up, and so was Lena. She had color in her cheeks now. She smiled more often, spoke more freely. Sometimes Daniel caught her humming under her breath while she cooked, or reading aloud softly to herself by the fire. The bruises that once marked her had faded. The ones no one could see were slower to heal. But something inside her still trembled, a quiet, hidden truth that pressed against her ribs like a secret heartbeat. It came out one evening in late March. The light outside had turned golden, and the air was warm enough to leave the window open. Daniel had brought a small box of paints from his studio, setting them on the table. I thought you might like these, he said. You mentioned painting once. Lena smiled, tracing the smooth surface of the brushes. I used to, before everything got too heavy. You should start again, he said simply. Sometimes our hands remember before our hearts do. She looked up, about to thank him, but instead her voice caught, trapped somewhere between gratitude and fear. Daniel, she said softly, there's something I need to tell you. He set his cup down, attentive but calm. All right. She stood, restless, crossing her arms as if trying to hold herself together. When you found me that night, I wasn't just running from the cold. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. I was running from someone. Her voice trembled. A man named Victor. I met him last year. I thought he cared about me, but he didn't. He took everything. My money, my papers, my sense of worth. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed even. He hurt you. Lena nodded. And then he left. When I realized I was pregnant, I tried to find him, but he was gone. I didn't want the child to grow up in that kind of life. I left the city, hoping to disappear. That's when she stopped, breath catching. When the car hit me. Silence. The only sound was the wind stirring the curtains. Daniel's gaze softened, full of quiet comprehension. You're carrying a child? Yes, she whispered. 5 months now. The words hung in the air, fragile and final. She expected him to step back, to regret helping her, to feel trapped by her confession. Instead, Daniel only exhaled slowly and sat down, his voice low and steady. Then we'll make sure you're safe. Both of you. Lena blinked, stunned. You don't have to. I know, he interrupted gently. But I want to. Tears welled up before she could stop them. You don't even know me. He looked at her with that calm, quiet strength she was beginning to depend on. Maybe not. But I know what it's like to need someone to stay, and to be afraid they won't. That broke her. She sank into the chair across from him, her face buried in her hands. The sobs came in small, shuddering waves, not the desperate kind of grief she'd known before, but something cleaner, like pain finally letting go. When she lifted her head, Daniel was still there, still watching her with that same unwavering steadiness. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You don't need to, he replied. Just eat, rest, and let yourself believe that this isn't the end of your story. Outside, the last light of day bled into the horizon, deep orange fading to violet. Inside, a fragile peace settled between them, the kind born only after truth has finally been spoken. Lena placed a hand over her stomach. For the first time, she didn't feel fear, only the faint, startling warmth of hope. Spring arrived quietly, creeping into the valley in thin threads of green. The snow melted from the eaves, the air filled with birdsong, and the world outside Daniel's estate began to breathe again. Inside the guest house, time passed differently, slower, softer. Lena's belly had rounded gently, her movements careful but graceful. The color had returned to her face, and sometimes in the afternoons, Daniel would catch her outside, barefoot in the garden, her hand resting protectively over her stomach as she listened to the wind. They had built a kind of wordless peace, fragile, beautiful, unspoken. He worked in his studio. She painted in the light by the window. Evenings belonged to silence, tea, and the quiet music of a world mending itself. But peace has a way of drawing out the past. It began with the letter. One morning, Daniel found it in his mailbox. No return address. Only his name written in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, a single page. I know where she is. She's mine. Tell her Victor says hello. He stood in the kitchen for a long time, the note trembling slightly between his fingers. When he finally went to the guest house, Lena was painting, soft shades of dawn over a hill. She looked peaceful, content, unaware. He couldn't bring himself to break it yet. That night, after she fell asleep, he stayed awake in his chair by the fire, the letter folded in his hand. He stared into the flames and made a silent promise. Not again. Not her. 2 weeks later, the promise was tested. Lena went into labor earlier than expected. The pain came sharp and sudden, like lightning through her spine. Daniel drove her through the rain-soaked roads to the small hospital on the edge of town, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Hours passed. The storm raged outside. Then a cry. Small, trembling, alive. A girl. Maya. When Daniel placed the child in Lena's arms, something inside her broke and healed at the same time. She looked up at him through tears, whispering, "She's safe, isn't she?" He smiled, a quiet, trembling smile. She's safe. For a few hours the world was perfect. Until the door opened. A nurse entered with a clipboard, followed by a man in a gray coat, tall, lean, eyes like storm water. Victor. The moment Lena saw him, her face went white. She clutched Maya closer, shaking her head. "Lena," he said softly, mock-sweet, stepping closer. "You didn't think I'd let you go that easily, did you?" Daniel stepped between them. His voice was calm but edged with steel. "You need to leave." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Her savior." "I'm the man who's going to make sure you never touch her again." A tense silence followed, the kind that vibrates like a wire about to snap. Then Victor laughed, cold and sharp. "You think you can keep me away? The law doesn't forget a father." Lena's voice cracked. "You're not a father. You're a wound." That silenced him. For a heartbeat, his expression twisted. Pride curdled into rage. He started forward, but Daniel caught his arm, firm and immovable. "Leave," Daniel said again. "Now." Something in his tone, quiet, absolute, made even Victor hesitate. A nurse appeared at the door, sensing the tension. The moment broke. Victor pulled free, glaring at them both. "This isn't over," he spat. You can't hide her forever. When he was gone, the air felt like it had been vacuumed out of the room. Lena sank into Daniel's chest, trembling. Maya whimpered softly, the tiny sound cutting through the silence like a plea. Daniel held them both, his voice steady against the chaos still ringing in his chest. "He won't come near you again," he said. "I promise." But in the quiet hours that followed, as Lena and Maya slept, Daniel sat in the hospital corridor, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. He knew promises meant little to men like Victor. This time protection wouldn't be enough. This time he would have to fight. Spring had fully awakened by the time the case against Victor began. The sun shone brightly over the courthouse, but for Lena, the day felt heavy, threaded with fear and anticipation. Daniel had insisted she stay home with Maya, promising that he would handle everything. She had wanted to follow him, to see him face the man who had stolen her peace, but he had refused. "You need to be safe," he said firmly. "Maya needs her mother calm, not scared." So she stayed in the guest house, pacing the wooden floors and holding her daughter close, while Daniel went to the courthouse. The trial was swift and merciless in exposing Victor's true nature. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp, composed woman named Elena, presented a mountain of evidence. Victor's criminal history, his prior accusations of abuse and fraud, witness testimonies, and photographs documenting Lena's injuries and the conditions she had endured. Victor's smug confidence melted under the weight of truth. He tried to argue for visitation rights, for fatherhood, but the courtroom was unforgiving. Each lie he uttered was countered with facts, his threats documented and catalogued like evidence in a damning dossier. Back at the guest house, Lena spent the day reading to Maya, holding her close, reciting softly passages from the book Daniel had given her. "All that is dark will pass. There is light left for those who wait." Hours later, a message arrived from Daniel. It was brief. "It's over. He has no rights. You and Maya are safe. Come to me when you're ready." For the first time in months, Lena felt the tension inside her chest unwind. She pressed Maya's small hand against her heart and allowed herself to cry. Tears of relief, of release, of a long, harrowing weight lifting from her shoulders. When she finally reached the courthouse, Daniel was waiting outside, his expression calm but softened by a faint smile. The sun fell on him in a way that made him seem almost larger than life, a steadfast figure in her storm-tossed world. "You're safe now," he said quietly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Yes," she whispered, "we are." Maya gurgled in her carrier, tiny fingers curling around her mother's sweater. Lena looked at Daniel, eyes wide with gratitude. He bent slightly and kissed her forehead. "This is just the beginning," he said. "For both of you." And for the first time in her life, Lena truly believed him. That evening, they returned to the estate together. The sun set behind the hills, casting the mansion and its gardens in soft golden light. Lena watched as Daniel carried Maya inside, feeling an unfamiliar warmth, not just in her chest, but in the sense that they were finally home, safe from the shadows that had haunted her for so long. The world outside might still be uncertain, but inside the walls of the estate, love and protection had taken root. Spring unfolded fully, washing the valley in green and gold. Flowers emerged from the thawing earth, streams babbled with melted snow, and birds filled the air with song. For Lena, the world felt lighter, brighter, and entirely different from the frozen, shadowed life she had left behind. The mansion hummed with quiet life. Lena had moved into the main house with Maya, and the guest house was now a memory of the place she had first begun to heal. Daniel had transformed the estate into a home, arranging soft rugs, warm blankets, and cozy nooks where mother and daughter could rest and grow. Mornings were slow and tender. Lena would wake to the soft sunlight spilling across the bedroom, Maya gurgling beside her. Daniel would already be downstairs, preparing breakfast or tending to the gardens. The small routines, the scent of coffee, the warmth of freshly baked bread, the sound of laughter, became the rhythm of their days. Evenings were quiet but full. Daniel read aloud to Lena and Maya, choosing from the books she loved. Tales of adventure, poetry, and stories of human resilience. His voice, steady and gentle, filled the rooms, wrapping them in safety and comfort. Lena sometimes watched him from the sofa, marveling at the care he gave, and the way his presence transformed the house into a sanctuary. The trauma of the past had not vanished entirely, but it had lost its power. Victor's shadow no longer loomed. The law had severed his control, and Daniel's unwavering support gave Lena the courage to embrace the future without fear. One evening, as the sky blushed with the last light of day, Lena sat on the terrace with Maya in her lap, Daniel beside her. The garden shimmered with the soft glow of lanterns, and the air smelled of spring blooms. "You've made this place ours," Lena said softly. "I never imagined this." Daniel took her hand, entwining their fingers. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But sometimes the world surprises you with something better than you ever expected." Maya reached up to touch Lena's cheek, and Lena smiled down at her daughter. She felt the warmth of the moment seep into her bones. Safety, love, hope. A life rebuilt from shards of the past. Daniel kissed the top of Lena's head. "This is only the beginning," he said. "A new life for both of you." And Lena knew he was right. They had survived the storm. The world beyond might still be uncertain, but here, in the soft glow of the estate, they had found home. They had found each other. The future stretched before them, open and bright. For Lena, for Maya, and even for Daniel, it was the promise of love, protection, and new beginnings. The story closes with the sound of a baby's laughter, a mother's quiet smile, and the comforting presence of a man who chose to stand as a shield and a companion. Shadows of the past may linger, but they no longer define the present. Life, like spring after winter, has returned, full of light, warmth, and hope. Let me know how you liked my story. And be sure to subscribe to our channel. A new story will be posted here tomorrow.